this is the example of what an end product would look like. And then it goes away. All right, there's still stuff I have to fix on here. There's some grain. You can kind of see it right here on that depth of field. So I have to turn up my depth of field settings. There's also some like weird wavy pattern happening right here. If I turn that off, you can see it's kind of like wavy right there. And then again, more of that grain. Anytime you start introducing stuff like some motion blur, you can get this graininess in there. This is coming from depth of field. Typically, you're going to find this thing called samples, and samples are what going to make things look better. And I believe even when my guy comes down, right about here, right there, you can definitely see that there's some lines happening on him. It's not just like nice and smooth. If I can get that exact frame, there it is. Okay, so anytime we do stuff like motion blur or depth of field, what happens is the system has multiple layers there, and how it blends between these layers are called samples. The more samples we have, typically the smoother it's going to be. So that's something I'll have to fix. Because of the complexity of this specific animation, this took over 2 hours to render out of After Effects. So obviously be aware of that if you have something as complex as this one is. Cool. So this is my character all finished up. We mentioned before, you know, we want to have at least 3 things animated on mine. I'm animating the pupils. Typically that's going to be something across the board people will have. The eyes I'm animating too, like his actual like eye shapes. His mouth changes shape. His crown moves, his horns move, and then this piece of his staff will also move. So everything that is on a separate layer is something that I will have control over after I get into After Effects. His crown, because I wanted it to look like it was in front and in back, I have 2 pieces. So one is a front crown, and then the other one is the back of the crown. And you'll see they're actually layered, you know, in front of or behind his head. Here's his right eye shape. Here's his left eye shape. Here's his mouth line. Here's his yelling mouth. And there's the back of the crown. Okay, so I saved all the stuff. I'm going to bring it into my file inside of After Effects. So this process is the same thing that we've done before. Just going to our folder, 1900, Parallax, artwork. There's my character. Composition, retain layer size. Again, make sure if you have character 1, 2, 3, 4 that you uncheck this box, so it only brings in that 1. All right, so here's my character. Now, we're going to eventually drop him into our main composition, but I need to set him up inside of this composition, okay? So all the things we're going to animate, I'm going to set up here. I can also take my quality back up to full so I can actually see what's happening. So a couple things I'm going to do before I get any further is I'm just going to start connecting things that make sense. So things like when his hand moves, that other part of the blade should also move, okay? So I'm just going to go to, this is the hand weapon. I'm going to take the blade and just parent it to the hand weapon. That way when I grab this and move it, then both things will move around. That way as he's like stomping down or whatever, it all moves together. The same thing with the head. Layer 1, which I just didn't actually name to be like the face, if I move this, none of the other pieces move with it, and that obviously looks weird. So I want to parent all of these things to it. Crown, pupil, pupil, back crown, yes. I'm not going to do a back crown. Everything else will be parented to face. Back crown will be parented to front crown. Okay. Now you'll have to figure that out for your specific one. Your character is going to have obviously different features. You'll have to just see what should be parented with what. In this case, I want the back of the crown to be parented to the front. So when I grab the front of the crown here and I move it, I'm able to grab both pieces at the same time, and it looks like it's actually going like over his head. Okay. When I grab his pupil and move it, I can do that separately. Grab this separately. If I were to grab his head and move it, you'll see that everything moves together. I could even take the entire hand and put that on there, but I don't want to do that. And I think I actually don't want to take the pupils. Let me take the pupils off of there. Put that to none. And the reason for that is if I go and I start squishing the head down, it's going to squish the pupils down too and anything else that's maybe part of it. So even the crown, I think, I don't want that to be parented. There we go. All right, so some of the stuff is parented, some of the stuff is not. Now, we're going to control all of these things here, but not in this composition, okay? What we don't want to do is, this is my environment. I don't want to grab all of the layers for this and drop it into here. It's way too much stuff to try to animate and move around. What I want to do is have a flattened out version of my character that I could animate and then have controls that would allow me to move specific things around on it. Let me jump over to YouTube real quick. All right, so I'm not going to bring down all the layers into my composition. I'm going to bring down the flattened out composition into my environment. So there he is. Now, he'll be 3D, so I can click on the 3D layer. That's not a big deal right now. I'm also going to put him above my adjustment layer so he's not blown out. There we go. And I'm going to start putting effects on here, controls on here, of things that I want to be able to manipulate in the other composition. So I'm going to go to Effect, I'm going to go to Expression Control, and all of these are different things that we can add to him that will allow us to control stuff in the other composition. For instance, let's say that I wanted to move his staff up and down. I'm going to create a point slider. And what that will allow me to do is connect these two attributes to the position of his staff in the other composition, so that as I drag this left and right, I can actually move his staff left and right. Because right now this is flat, I can't do anything with it. If I have a controller on here, then I can start moving stuff around. So I'll do this one, and then we'll come back and add the other ones. So first thing I'm going to do is zero this out. That just makes everything easier. I'm going to go back into the character. I'm going to find his hand weapon here, and I'm going to go to the position. Now what I need to do is link this position to that effect in the other composition. Now you'll see the effect is gone. We can't see what that effect is. If you're accustomed to expressions enough, you can type in exactly what the thing would be, but we're not there yet. So I'm going to jump back to my environment. Here's that point control, which I'm going to rename to be staff position. And I'm going to hit this lock. And when I hit that, I can go into the other composition, and that stays right there. Now, using the exact same thing we did on the hologram, I can alt-click on position. I can drag this up here. And then if I were to just hit enter, his staff goes away. Any guesses why his staff went away? What was that? Not that it's not 3D. Look where it's moved to. 0, 0, and it was at like 540 by something. So if I scoot over here, that's where his staff is, okay? So what I need to do for every one of these items is alt-click it. So you can see it's 641 by 287. When I drag this to this number here, it automatically drops it to 0. But if I just add it to the original number, then I can click off and it'll stay in the exact spot, okay? So what I'm doing is saying, okay, wherever you're at, stay there, and use this as an offset. So now if I were to click and drag, you can see how now this is controlling the position of the staff. So if I'm in the other composition, now I can move that around. Come on. Don't do it. Oh. You were doing so good. Let's close Illustrator. That's not why it's doing it, but just being stupid. All right, let's do that again. Let's go to here. Let's find my character, composition retain, yes. Drag him into here. That's let's reset to 0. And now inside here, I'm just going to parent my stuff again real quick. Hand weapon. Back crown will be parented to front crown. Right eye, left eye, mouth yell will all be parented to layer 1, which is actually supposed to be called face. And then we'll save. That's why it's important to save. All right, so back to this, Click my lock, click my character, save again, why not? Hand weapon, yes. All right, so let's try it again. Alt, click on there, drag this to the point, and then add itself to it. Okay, so now save again, go back to my environment, drag this over, there we go. So now we're getting it to be actually moving around the way it should be. So now I'm affecting stuff in other compositions without having to actually jump to it, because otherwise we have to keep jumping back and forth, and that would be a huge hassle. So now let's say I want to rotate it. I'm going to make sure I'm clicked on this Parallax character, go to my expressions, and I'm going to add another one. Look at these as how many numbers you're trying to control, and that's the one you should pick from here, okay? So if I go here, what would I use to rotate this? Well, no, it's rotation. That's all I was on. Okay, so you just say animate rotation. Rotation is a single digit, right? It's 0 to 360 pretty much. So then I could go back here. I can go to expression control. Point slider gives me 2 numbers. That's not going to do me any good. I don't need 2 numbers. I just need 1 number. So that's where you can use slider control. See, 1 number. So same thing, it's locked. I go to my character. I alt click on this. The original number is 0. So if I were just to drag this to that, we're not going to notice any huge difference. It's just going to be 0 is now 0, and I don't need to do any math offsetting. And then there, that works. Now you'll see there's a delay. When I'm in here and I'm dragging, it doesn't update because I'm actually moving something in a different composition and seeing it in this composition. So if I go to this comp, it actually plays back in real time where I could click and drag and see it happen. Okay, if I decide I don't like where that pivot is from, I'll go into here, I'll hit Y, I'll move the pivot down. There we go. And then I can jump back to this, go back to my rotate, there it is. And it'll actually rotate from his hand. I don't know why I moved it down so far. Right in the middle of his hand is typically where that would be pivoting around. All right, staff, rotate. Okay, obviously the names for each of these you want to make sure they're descriptive enough. I mentioned before I'd also want to control the pupils. So I'm going to go to my expression control. I'm going to add another point slider. And this will be left pupil. And you can duplicate. And if I were to have set these to 0 beforehand, then I wouldn't have had to worry about typing it again. All right, left pupil, right pupil. As I mentioned before, his left is the left on my thing. His right is the right, okay? It just helps you further down when you do other stuff. Left pupil, right pupil, there we go. So I'm going to go to their position, alt-click this one, drag this to left pupil, hit the plus sign, and then drag this to position. And then just so you can see what this expression is looking like, that's what it's doing right here, is it's taking, let me give us a little bit of space there so we can see it. There we go. It's taking that pupil control in the other composition and adding it to the position of the current layer of that left pupil. Okay? I'll do the same thing here. There's right pupil plus that. Now if I switch to my other comp, make sure I save before I start screwing with stuff. Drag this over, there it is. Drag that over. Okay, and now I can control where the pupil is set up. Now, it may seem like really crazy, like why would I move the pupil that far up and down? But when his face starts stretching, his eye sockets are going to be moved, and I really need to make sure his pupils stay exactly where they need to be. So let's add some other ones in here. Some of the other ones that I want to control, I want his eyebrows to like furrow, like he can like get angrier. So I'm going to add a couple controls for pulling the eyebrows down, okay? You can do some of these as like 2 controls. Some of these you may want just 1 control. If I'm always going to move both eyebrows down at the same time, I can use 1 control for that. But if I want to do like the rock and have 1 down and 1 up, then I would have 2 controls, okay? For demonstration purposes, I'll do 2. So I'm just duplicating this one and renaming it to right eyebrow. Oops. And move that down there, left eyebrow. And then I'm going to jump into this. I'll save again because it seems to be crashing every 2 minutes. Now, to get the eyebrow to furrow like I want, I have to figure out what kind of item I'm going to do. So far with the staff and the pupils, I've done position and rotation. If I go to my right eye here and I go to its position and I just start, like, let's say moving it, that's not really going to give me the desired effect of what I want. I want it to look like the eyes are staying there and he's just getting like angrier. So I'm going to utilize the puppet pinning. If you've used this in Photoshop, I think Illustrator also has it. But basically what it allows you to do is put pins inside your artwork and then control the pins. And it's really neat how it does it. So some pins are ones that we would animate. Some pins are ones we would use to lock things in place. So for this, I want to basically lock in this area here. So I click right there on the right eye. I click right here on the right eye. These 2 are my stabilizers. I don't want to ever move those. This is where I want to move, okay? So now watch how I can just grab this and drag it down, and now he's going to look angrier or, I don't know, more happy or sad or something. Maybe I want to add another one down here. Let me hit undo. I'm going to drag another one here and then do that. There we go. All right, there. Now I have a lot more control. Sometimes you have to add a couple more pins just to lock everything in more. There's a limit. I can't go this far because the pupil doesn't fit, but I can go like that. Now the idea with this is that I would basically just move it up and down, let's say. I'm going to do the same thing on the other eye. So let me grab left eye and go do. And then the one I'm going to move will be right here. And again, it works the same way, okay? So now what I want to do is control those 2 dots from my other composition. So that's what these 2 are for. So I'm going to go to right eye first, under mesh, under deform, under puppet pin 4. And you can rename this to be the eyebrow, way you know what it is. It comes preset with keyframes. I can just turn those off. I don't need to have the keyframes on here. And then I'm just going to alt click and then just drag this to right eyebrow and then add in, just like I did before, the same number here. Now I'll do the same thing on the other one. Go to left eye, open up mesh, open up deform, open up 4, turn this off, alt click, drag this to left, add the same number back in. There we go. So now if I switch to this composition, I save, I'll set this to full. We turn off the moon here, which is right there. Save again. Now I can drag this just up and down. And now you see I have a lot more control over doing just that. I could do the same thing with the horns. I could put puppet pins on the horns and move those in or out if I wanted to. I could have one controller for both, or I can have a separate controller for each of these. Let's say that I want to do one controller. Horns. Not really horns, but whatever. Oops. So now I'm going to go into my character. I'm going to go to face, because that's where they're on. And I'm going to put in some locking points. So I like to put the locking points in first. That way I don't accidentally move stuff that I don't want to move. And then at the end, then I put in my last 2 points. And then I can test it out and verify, it's not moving too much. You can see where it is as I move this that, his face is actually deforming a little bit. That's just part of the tool. After Effects 2019 actually has some extra tools in there where you can freeze areas to say don't move this at all. 2018 doesn't have those yet. So that'll be good enough for this one. Let me make sure I didn't, yeah, there we go. All right, so I'm using one controller for this, and all I want to do is be able to move these, let's say, closer together or further apart. That's what I want to do, okay? I'm not going to move them up or down. I'm just moving them closer or further apart. So I'm going to go to the mesh. I'm going to go to deform. I'm going to go to puppet pin 7 and 8, which are horn right and horn left. Again, his left, his right. I'm going to alt-click on this. I'm going to drag this onto horns. I'm going to hit the plus sign and then add in the same position here. Do the same thing on the bottom one. Alt-click this, hit the plus sign, and add this to that. And I can turn off the keyframes too. I don't need keyframes on that. Save, go back to this. Okay, now we're going to have to fix this, but watch what happens. I drag it this way, they both go to the right. I drag it this way, they both go to the left. Okay? So I may not want that. I want both to either go in or go out. I don't want them both to like sway left or right. That could be an effect, not the effect I want. So all I'm going to do here is one of these is adding that number. The other one I'm going to subtract the number. And what that should do is just make it do exactly what I want it to do. So instead of it being a plus here, I'm just going to subtract. And that didn't work at all. Let's try that again. Let's delete this. Let's say this number here minus that number there. There we go. I don't know what happened there, but I redid it and it worked. All right, so now when I go here and I adjust this, you can see they're either going to go out together or they're going to go in together. And if I get to the point where I'm like, okay, well now his head looks weird because it's like fluxing or flexing, I can still go back into this, click on the face, and I can add more puppet pin points. You just want to avoid kind of overdoing it because you'll have, it'll look like too stiff. All right, that doesn't look bad there. And I wouldn't stretch it out that far. I'm just checking it out. All right, good. So for the most part, I have all the stuff that I need. I do want to be able to control the mouth, though. The mouth is going to be different. The mouth has two different actual layers that I need to switch between. So if I go to my different shapes, I have mouth yell, and I have mouth line. Oops. Mouth line. There we go. So I need to switch between these two different layers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my environment here. I'm going to go to my effect. I'm going to go to expression. And this one I'm going to do a checkbox. And this is going to be just called yell. And the idea is if the box is checked, he's yelling. If the box is unchecked, it's back to the straight line. There's no transition here. It's just going to pop between one or the other. Okay? So this one will be a little bit more complex, but it's still pretty simple if you just break it down to the essentials. So what I want to do is I'm going to go to mouth, and I'm going to use opacity, okay? If I turn the opacity to 0, the mouth is gone. If I turn it to 100, the mouth is showing, okay? So that's all I want to do is just switch between 100 and 0. So I'm going to alt-click on opacity, drag this to checkbox, and then click off, and we'll see what value we get, okay? When this box is checked, look at the value of opacity here. I don't know if you can see it. It says 1%. And when it's unchecked, it says 0%. So this is switching between 0 and 1. I needed to switch between 0 and 100. So how can I make 1 equal to 100? Plus 99. But if I do 0 plus 99, what would that do? It'll make it 99 times 100, right? So if 0 times 100 is 0, 1 times 100 is 100, right? So that should work. So now we go, cool. So now that works for that one, but now I need to do the opposite, which is a little bit trickier to do. Because with this one, if this is unchecked, you know, it's gone, it's 0. If it's checked, it's 100. So with this other one, I have to still use the opacity, but I'm going to use a different type of thing. I'm going to use what's called a if-else expression. If you've ever done any kind of programming, there are certain fundamental things, and if-else is one of those fundamental things across the board you'll see. The idea with this is that you put in what you are testing. So you're saying basically, I'm going to write this in regular English, if the box is checked, the opacity will equal 0. If else, the opacity equals 100. Okay, so if the box is checked for that straight line, the opacity will be 0 because its yell is on. And if the box is unchecked, then the opacity will be 100. Now the way we write this inside of After Effects is we would test something. So we would say if, and then we would give it a property, okay, whatever the checkbox is. So if the checkbox, and that just means if it's equal to something other than 0, then we're going to put the opacity equal to 100, or to 0. Else, it'll equal 100. That's right, yes? Yes. Okay. So I'm going to alt-click here. I'm going to say if, parenthesis, drag this checkbox, and then I'm going to say this opacity, oops, I don't need to put opacity, I just need to put the value. So if it's checked, then do 100, else 0. That should work. Oops, wrong way. I just switched the numbers, so it should be this and that. There we go. All right, we're getting closer. That should have worked. Let me see what else I did wrong. If da-da-da-da. There. All right. So this is what it's currently set up to. If blah, 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 checkbox, put it equal to 0. Otherwise, put it equal to 100. That's what it should be. Let me see if I'm missing something here. I'll put a little squiggly. Yesterday, I don't think I needed anything more than that. That should have worked. Do I? Where do I have one? If. Let's see, 1, 2. So that one's covered, that one's covered, that one's covered, that one's covered. Yeah, it's good. All right, so I'll just do the opposite then. That's fine. If checkbox, blah, blah, blah. Let me see this bigger. Comp, layer, yellow, checkbox, yes. Oh, I have that extra thing at the end. There we go. All right. So I had to write a little bit longer. I don't know why this time I did and last time I didn't. Basically, it's saying if the checkbox is checked, then the opacity is 0. If the checkbox is not checked, then the opacity equals 100. And that's what that equals 0. And you have to put 2 equal signs for that. And this should not be there. Okay? So if you want to do something like that where you're switching between different mouth poses, that's one way to do it. There's other ways too, but that's the simplest way, just to have one checkbox that does it. I could have had 2 checkboxes, one for the mouth open, one for the mouth closed, and just use this as a way to switch them both on. So I would have basically a checkbox for each different mouth shape, and I would toggle between each different mouth shape that way. All right, so last couple that I want to add here, I'm going to go back to this, I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to add in 2 sliders. And this will be stretch and this will be squash. And as my character comes into the scene, as he's sliding down, I don't want him to be like one solid block. I want him to get like thinner, and then when he hits the ground, he kind of like squashes out a little bit. Even though he's made of ice, he would still kind of have that characteristic quality. So on my face, I'm going to animate the scale properties of these so that as I animate these, that's what I want to be able to control. Okay, so squash is going to be this one, and then stretch is going to be, stretch will be, stretch will actually be like this, and then squash will actually be like that, okay? But I'm going to just control one for one of these and one for the other one. All right, so squash, I'll do this one, and then stretch, I'll do that one. All right, so I'm going to Alt-click. I'm going to just drag this here just to get the syntax correct. Okay, this is what it gives me, is this information. And what I need to do basically is just say the X is going to equal my squash, the Y is going to equal my stretch, and then down here I need to assign it to the right values, X and Y. Okay, so it's essentially what it's going to look like. So I'm going to take the temp and just change this to X, get rid of this, drag this to squash, semicolon at the end, Y equals, set this to stretch, yes, semicolon at the end, and then set the two values down here to be X comma Y. Okay, and then he disappears. Why does he disappear? Yep, those are at 0. So set those back to 100, and he comes back. I also need to fix where he's stretching from. The middle of his face is not a good idea. If he's hitting the ground, he would be like squashing or stretching from the bottom. So I'm going to put the pivot for his face down here by his chin. There we go. And so now if I go like this, he's squashes, and if I go like that, or stretches, he goes like that, he squashes. There we go. I do need to do one more for the crown. So I'm just going to duplicate my staff position, scoot that down to, let's say, here, crown. And then I'm going to duplicate the rotation, slide that down here. Oops. And I just need to do the front of the crown. Position, rotation. Once you get the hang of this, it's actually not terribly too difficult, and you don't need to know anything except for what to connect to what. And that's what's really cool about the way After Effects does its expressions. There we go, that one's done. All right, so now all my controls are here. Obviously you want to test them, make sure they all work. Yes, they do. All right, I'm going to save. And now I'm going to get to the actual animation part of my character. In my scene, it's way over here that he actually comes into the scene. Okay, way down here. And it's like, I don't know, 15 seconds or something. So I'm going to scoot my camera to the top view so I can see exactly where my camera is. There it is. Here's my character, so I'm going to push him back. And how he comes into the scene is going to be up to you. You have to figure out how you want your character specifically to come into the scene. Give him a rotation. Now I can switch back to my camera and actually see what he looks like. One of my gripes. There we go. Way too far away. Let's take the Z position here and push him a bit closer. There we go. And then we'll scoot him over a little bit. All right, so that looks like a good spot for him to be coming into the scene. Maybe I'll scale him down just a little bit. That's good. All right. I'm going to check his position in Y because I want to make sure that when he hits the ground, he's actually hitting the ground and going, close to it. Now you can see he's pretty far away from the ground. Apparently really far away from the ground. All right, you got to go back further, guy. All right, I think now he's actually like hitting the ground. Nope, still not. All right, let's switch to a different camera because this is weird how he's not even hitting the ground. That's my ground. He's actually below the ground, so I'm not sure why he's not going through the ground. Let's go to the left view. Yeah, there's my ground, there's the guy. He should be going through that. It just might be a, I have my settings down, so it just might be that we're not seeing him like cutting into the floor here. All right, so now let me just push him closer to the camera. There we go. All right, so now he's in the right spot. So I'm going to animate him. In this case, I'm animating him going down. You'll notice I turned off all my trees. All my settings here are really low because of how slow this was going for me, and it crashed even more than you're currently seeing. Oh, I'm like, why is he way back there? Okay. So this is the part where I want him to come down, is right when the guy stops walking. All right, let me just go to my camera. Position, there it is. So this is where he stops walking, is right here. So that's when he's going to actually come down. So I'm going to go to my character. I'm not going to move this layer. That will screw up the way it's animating. Okay, I keep the layer starting at frame 1. I am going to Alt left click though, so it cuts the layer so I don't see it beforehand. Now he's going to come down and land on the ground. I'll set a keyframe. From this point, we're just setting keyframes. Scoot that up. Move him up here. There we go. So now he comes down. Let's turn this to half just so we can see a little bit quicker. There we go. All right, and then I'll do the same thing that we've done since basically our first assignment. Ease it, go to my speed graph, have him slam into the ground. Oh, I should turn motion blur off also. There we go. No, play from here. There we go. All right, so now he's just coming down into the frame. Now, to do all the other stuff that I want him to do, as he comes down, I want him to actually like squash and stretch as he's going. So I'm going to go into here and start setting keyframes. Here's all my keyframe sliders and stopwatches. So when he's flying down like this, he should be like squished in and stretched out. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do this. Okay. I'll set a keyframe here. I'm going to go up 1 frame, and then I'm going to squash him down. So this is going to be the opposite, basically. So I go here, and I go there. Notice I'm not touching the eyes yet. I want to get the squashing done first, and that will help kind of sell the idea of what's happening. Then I'll go up a couple more frames and just reset these to 100. All right, so now I'm going to just set the beginning of my work area here, the end of my work area there, and just watch what happens. For stuff like this, when it's this slow, you have to set those work areas and just preview exactly what you want. All right, so now you can see he comes down. It feels like there's a little bit more energy to him, a little bit more substance, because he kind of does that little bounce there. All right, then once I'm happy with that, I go back and I look at where his eyes are and everything. So I go here and I say, okay, well, his pupils are like not even close. So let's go to this point. I'm going to go to his pupils. There they are. I'm going to go to the Y direction and scoot them up. Oh, don't do it. Oh, it's going. If you're going to crash, just crash. Come on. with all the keyframes, and I'll just go through those. That way, if it crashes, we don't have to worry about that. All right. So here's my character down here. There he comes in. Let's turn him on. We'll hit U for the keyframes. Okay. So here's all the keyframes and what they're doing. So here's him coming down. Let me turn motion blur off. Here's him coming down. And you'll see his pupils are lined up. So it's just a matter of setting those keyframes, putting the pupils back where they belong. And then as he squashes, I need to animate the pupils so that they stay in line. So here you can see they're still right in that spot. So I just went to where I set those keyframes for squashing and moved those pupils into place. You'll also see that I added some animation to the hand so that as the hand comes down, everything doesn't feel like it's all blocky. The hand has a little bit of lag to it, and when it hits, there's a little bit of bounce that happens on the staff. And then here, he furrows his eyebrow. You can see him furrowing. His blade is actually rotating in. And then he rotates, and he's moving closer to the camera. And rotating, and then he yells, and then rotates some more. And then that's the end of it. Okay, and I actually have the eyebrow kind of furrowing up and down, and these little horns on top of his head, they do move out, it looks like, right about there. Okay, so that's the process for animating him. Once the rig is set up, the animation part goes very quickly, as long as it doesn't crash. All of my positions, rotations are done on the actual composition, but any of those secondary things, squashing, stretching, any of those controls that we set up, those are done on that expression control right here. And just for fun, while we're here, let me see what that expression was I used on this one. Mouth line T. It's the same expression, I just put it backwards and it still works, whatever. It should have worked. All right, now when we do motion blur, something to pay attention to. Think about where things are actually moving. All of his facial features, are they moving inside of this environment comp? Like, is he squashing and stretching inside of this comp? Or is he squashing and stretching inside this comp and we're seeing the result in the other comp? Right? So all my motion blur needs to happen inside of this composition. Otherwise, we don't see it in the other one. So make sure all my stuff is on here. And then when I come back to this, I'll see all that motion blur happening. I typically want to make sure all my stuff is set to full. All of these switches are set back to the smooth one. I've also hidden a bunch of my layers. Let's turn that back on. And then just so we can see where some of these more advanced settings are, I'm turning everything back on. It'll probably crash, we'll see. Let's turn a couple trees on here. There we go. All right, so we can see there's definitely some grain on this tree. If I go to my camera, I set up that depth of field on here. So I click that, I pick the distance, and then I just animated my camera moving to it. There's no samples inside of this area. Everything is just locked to whatever it's locked to. When I go to my composition settings and I go to my 3D render and I go to my ray trace, which is what this one's set to, maybe Cinema would have better results. Let's see. Nope, same thing. If I go in here, I can change this to either 25, which is a draft quality. Pulling this up higher, I'm going to get more realistic, smoother results. So you'll see all that grain that was just on that tree is no longer there because now it's calculating a higher smoothness to it. It's going to take longer. You can see all these little yellow things here is just updating. Let's get rid of that for a second. The other thing I want to look at is under my composition settings, under advanced, this is where you set up your motion blur. So if your motion blur is too spotted, where you see those lines, let me just make a new comp so we can see it actually in play here. There we go. So I'm just going to animate this kind of going really fast across the screen, just there and there. Actually, we'll start this off the screen. So we'll turn motion blur on here, we'll turn motion blur on here. We'll set these to easy ease. Crank that up. All right. So when we get here, look at the motion blur. That looks horrible. That doesn't look like good motion blur. It could be a neat effect if we were trying to do something maybe a little bit more vintagey or stylized, but for this it doesn't work. Under my comp settings, under that advanced tab, samples per frame. That's the samples for motion blur. So if you look at it, it says 4, and if you count the circles, there's 4 circles. If I set this to 8, now we have 8 circles. If I set it to 32, now we have 32 circles nicely blended together. If you take it too far up, it's going to take forever even more to render, okay? So you want to find the number that makes everything happy. The fastest thing in my scene is my character falling down. So I would watch him, see what looks good, and then I would set that to an appropriate number. In this case, 16 is no good. 32 is probably a good number. Typically, you double it each time, but you don't have to. Okay? So you'd want to make sure that all your stuff, motion blur, everything is set up. Your final, wherever I put that right here, it's not going to play because it's just going super slow. Let me set that to a quarter. I'm also using caps lock as a toggle to turn my playback on and off. I've renamed it 05 Parallax Environment. You can just call it Parallax also. It transitions. You can't see it because it's going slow. Here's my animation, and then it goes out. I've also added sound effects. I showed those last time. I have him yelling, so I found a cool yelling sound effect that I brought in here and kind of synced up to where he's going to yell. I have this slow breathing, so as he's walking through, you hear the breathing sound. I have that snow walking, and I have this wind sound effect, which probably could be maybe duplicated and just extended past this. There we go. So we have a little bit of overlap of wind animation. And then at the very, very end of the thing, wherever I have this, there's a transition that goes out right at the end. So again, we're not ending on just nothing or just on that character. We're ending on a blank screen. So we see where the start of it is, we see where the end of it is. Cool. Any questions on that?